Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 463. We actually have sort of a unique guest on. We're going to be talking about OneStream and their journey to Azure with Ryan Berry, who, if you've been a longtime listener to the show, but Ryan was on back in the days when he used to work for us here at Microsoft. He's doing something completely different these days, but still using Azure. So we thought it'd be cool to have him back to, talk about how his new company is using Azure. Sajit, I'm joined here today by Sajit, and we are recording this on May 31st, so getting ready to go into June. So Sajit, we had a super busy week last week with Build, like tons and tons of announcements. What do you want to highlight?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's so much. They create the usual book of news that they do every year, and it is like a gigantic website that just keeps scrolling forever. But we'll put a link to that in the show notes. I did, and I think we'll do like a proper roundup of some of the Build news.
Yeah,
But I wanted to just provide a few tidbits just to whet everybody's appetite a little bit here. Obviously, the big star, as we all know, is the AI and the ML capabilities built into Azure, and a lot of that has come into Azure Cognitive Search, right? So vector databases have become a big thing now. When especially if you want to do queries across graphics, text, images, video. To be able to do queries across all of that, you really need like a special database, and vector databases are the way to go with these large language models. So Azure Cognitive Search now includes, a vector search. Also included is in Azure Cognitive Search is service for language, and this is the ability to be able to create summaries. Again, we saw the various demos, but if you have to do that in a very customized way using your own data, maybe you can just create a summary of a document or a piece of text or something to show to the user. That's now available in Azure Cognitive Service for Language. Some of the other things I think were demonstrated were prompt flow, which we all know is the new way to go for prompt engineering. Then importing foundational models, which open source into Azure AI ML, and then tweaking them for your own use. So that's a nice way to get started. And of course, just monitoring all these models, right? I think we need a way to do that. Microsoft Fabric seems to be the big kahuna now. That kind of encompasses Power BI, Data Factory, and Synapse. Kind of all blended together in an easier to use, seamless experience. So something definitely in the right direction there, because it used to be kind of confusing with all the services in the past. You never knew which one to pick, and so now it's a lot better. Then we have for Cosmos DB, there's a bunch of updates, but the one that I particularly like is called Materialized Views for Azure Cosmos DB NoSQL. And this just kind of allows you to, if you have queries that span various containers in Cosmos DB, typically you'd have a penalty for doing some sort of cross container query and whatnot. But now you can create this materialized view if you know you need that information quickly available, and then you just query the container, the materialized view, right? So it's something that and in SQL, I know you're nodding ahead, Evan, but in SQL we always have this. I think now it's
yeah,
come available into Cosmos DB as well. And they've added some nice enhancements for monitoring Cosmos DB, which is always a challenge. You always want to know where your queries are, how much time they're taking, and where the problems are. So they've got good integration now with App Insights into the .NET and Java SDKs. DevOps is something I think we really need to talk about. We never had a show on that, but certainly want to take a more detailed look at that. And then the one that we're talking just before the show, CBL Mariner. Evan, I think you were kind of referring to that. CBL Mariner, which is the base operating system that we use for all of Azure Core, is now available as a container host in AKS.
yeah. We had Jim Perrin, I believe, on to talk about that. Probably a year or so ago when they were just releasing it. They weren't releasing it for sort of general customer use, but it's been open source forever. So it's great to see it start surfacing. We're tiptoeing towards more and more scenarios where customers can actually use it for sure.
Yeah, it's a very slim, highly optimized operating system. So it's just perfect for AKS workloads. And it's just an option now in AKS. You can just say, I want to deploy it with Mariner. They call it Azure Linux, that's official term, but it's really CBO Mariner. And let's see, Azure Functions, of course, we all love that. Now it's easy to deploy containerized Azure Functions into ACA, Azure Container App. So that's an easy kind of plugin that they've developed just to kind of make it easier to use Azure Functions everywhere. Easy Functions, of course, can be written in any programming language. We did find out recently, though, Golang and Rust are two of the languages that are not fully natively supported in Azure Functions, believe it or not. You can still write code for Azure Functions using like a custom extension or whatever they call it. But it's not like there's no SDKs for that. But all of the languages are Azure Functions SDK. So certainly something to take a look at there. And yeah, there's more, but I just kind of listed some of the quick highlights there.
Yeah, there's a ton. Like it's just trying to absorb it is all hard. So, but yeah, no, it's a great roundup of some of the good ones. I'm sure we'll talk some more. At this point, let's transition over to you, Ryan. Ryan, if you could introduce yourself and then tell us what you do for OneStream. I'm so used to always saying, tell us what you do for Microsoft, but in this case, tell us what you do for OneStream and who OneStream is.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. So my title is a Senior Vice President of Architecture, which it sounds fancy in of itself, but basically I have a team of individuals who address a number of different facets of our platform, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do in a second as well. But first on my team, what we're focused on, or what my team is focused on, is driving forward a lot of the cloud native capability, or making effective use of cloud native capabilities to allow us to be more nimble in the market, to be able to do things more rapidly, innovate more rapidly, at lower cost, and also, deliver higher performance to our customers. And what are our customers? So our platform is and we're slowly evolving this into more spaces over time, but our core competency is what we call corporate performance management. So what does that mean? So if you think about a large conglomerate, or maybe like a auto manufacturer that's got divisions in Europe, Asia, and US, when it comes to reporting your financials, and you're publicly traded, when it comes to reporting your financials, they have to be audited, traceable in terms of, where you snap the line in the sand, and what currencies do you want to use to be able to report, some of these downstream subsidiaries. And it gets more complicated when we have customers who have partially owned subsidiaries. Maybe they have 70% ownership. So all of those variables and factors become really complicated when it comes to reporting earnings. And then you think about all the way down, like using a manufacturing company as an example. You're building widgets, and you've got suppliers you're buying stuff from. You've got engineering labor. You've got fuel that you're buying for fork trucks and a plant floor. All of those things are part of your P&L, but you don't report those on you start. So when it comes to taking all of those inputs that are part of your P&L that you do report, there's a tremendous amount of compute power needed to be able to make. To bring forward what those answers are.
Slice and dice it where you need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what our platform does, and what our customers use it for. And obviously, once you start getting into the office of CFO, you can do other things for helping customers plan for, capital life cycle, capital projects. Maybe you want to build a new plant in a different region, or enter a new market. So if the customer has some of that information, financial intelligence landed in OneStream, we can actually help facilitate them in doing other things beyond just reporting earnings and doing forecasts and planning and that sort of thing. So
okay.
So
it's, it sounds like you're a really classic sort of style of software in that you're providing a service to your downstream customers. They could care less how you're architected. They could care less sort of where it's sitting. I'm guessing in days past you used to be like installed in their data center. But at some point, y'all made the decision to sort of move to Azure. What did that look like? I think when you and I were talking before, you actually said there was some talk about building data centers at one point, and thankfully that didn't happen. Y'all are on Azure, but like y'all have been through the whole journey of, hey, we're in customers' data centers, to maybe we'll have our own, to now you're doing your SaaS. I assume it's basically a SaaS service at this
correct.
point.
The SaaS offering, and it's a materialized flavor of what we deployed in the on-premises space, because we still have some customers who deploy in what we call self-hosted models. So it could be not necessarily always on-premise, but it could be a different cloud provider and that sort of thing. And we're slowly inching our way away from doing that to be able to kind of allow us to more rapidly innovate. But to answer your questions, there actually is a little bit of care, which actually goes back to why I'm glad and thankful we didn't build out or make the decision to build out data centers ourselves back 5, 6 years ago. Because and there is a preference from our customers, in Europe and Asia in particular, where data sovereignty is really important.
Oh yeah,
where
that's a big deal.
Particularly when you're dealing with it was deemed sensitive information, keys of the kingdom, right? That the data our platform possesses is often, insiders would love to have access to that type of information before earnings are reported. So anyway, those sorts of challenges do exist with the way our customers deploy, and certainly there's another thing that's interesting that our customers need is access to questions in a quick manner. So when you're coming down to the wire to report your earnings, they want to be able to run a bunch of
there's no shifting that date at that point. That date is fixed.
Exactly. So you need a lot of compute power for that to be effective. So
Ryan, I was wondering, is this something that you offer? You said SaaS, but is this something that you offer like a single multi-tenanted service, or do customers have the option to buying this from the Azure marketplace, and deploying it to their own environment, right? So what's your definition of SaaS here?
All excellent questions. So today, because we have a code base that's supported in the on-premises world as well as in Azure. So it's a SaaS platform, and that we manage it on behalf of the customers, but it is deployed per customer. So, total complete isolation from customer to customer. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges with that, that presents and at scale. Certainly not the scale that you, Microsoft, have to deal with in the Azure world, but for mid-market customers such as us, it certainly presents challenges. But then we do exist in the Azure marketplace, so that's actually a delivery vehicle that customers can actually procure OneStream, using their Azure commitment or commit to consume, and it's not deployed in the customer environment because we actually manage it and have automations, because we have some FedRAMP jurisdictional operational practices we have to abide by, much like you all with Azure, and because of that, we have some operating practices and some surrounding stuff we have to put around customer environments that that require us to have an element of control over that, so we can check the box that it actually is in fact adhering to these levels of compliance that our customers expect.
What I mean, the data sovereignty is a big piece, right? Because outside of the hyperscalers, realistically, it's really hard for any random company to have data in all the places that their customers might live. But are y'all leveraging the CI/CD capabilities of Azure? Are you very VM based? Can you talk about sort of some of the architecture?
So we use Azure DevOps heavily, and for our core engineering, that's what we use for our source repositories. GitHub is maybe on the radar to potentially look at in the future, but we have a lot of investments on our CI/CD pipelines. So that's kind of the thing, honestly, that's holding back from sort of doing anything different in that space. But so we have lots of automations to be able to deploy into engineering environments, test environments, to be able to run automated tests against a particular release. And likewise, our cloud engineering team that actually supports us operationally, our SaaS footprint, they too make use of CI/CD pipelines, but they have a different a different angle that they look at things with. They use Terraform because they're focused on deploying a lot of the infrastructure required for customers. Whereas in the engineering world, where we have build environments, QA environments, and automations that run those the tests against those NuGet packages, our own NuGet packages that we have tests that run against. So all of those things kind of demand and dictate that they have different types of CI/CD pipelines and what our engineering team uses. But they, at the end of the day, still kind of the common thread that's used across across the functional organizations.
Yeah, Ryan, I think you said earlier that you used to be, and by the way, could you shift a little bit to your right a little bit? Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, there you go.
You're more
sorry,
in the frame.
I was gonna break in just a minute as well and ask that.
No worries. Yeah, that's better. We can see your whole face instead of just half of it. You mentioned that you used to be primarily like on premises, or that's how the kind of the product started, and then you kind of made an Azure version of it.
Yep.
I'm just curious, like, are there any, what was the path like, right, to kind of make this a cloud application? I don't want to say cloud native, maybe it is cloud native, but to move to Azure, what were some of the kind of things that you've been through this, and Microsoft life, you kind of went through that process. But I'm wondering how a company, an ISV like OneStream, went through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So because we actually do have a platform, there's a lot of flexibility that our customers have with our platform. And when I say platform, we literally have an IDE in our product that actually allows customers and partners to extend what our product does, to be able to customize it to their needs. And we have partners that have built solutions on top of our platform. So why that's relevant is that there's a tremendous amount of power and flexibility that comes along with that for things like using some .NET library that we don't include as part of our core platform. When you're running an on-prem world, it's fairly easy to do that. You can just copy it onto a server, and so we have customers who have grown to expect and admire that level of power. But then when it comes to the cloud world, that level of flexibility is hard to extend to a customer in a self-service model. Hard to impossible in some cases. If there's levels of compliance that we have to abide by. Certainly there's some challenges with that, and taking an on-prem product with a lot of power and capability or flexibility, and being able to still allow as much of that flexibility as possible in the cloud world. So those were certainly some challenges, and then there's the challenges where we might have an on-prem, or we do have some on-prem customers who have we have a relational data store that drives our product. SQL Azure is what we use in the cloud, and we have customers who have SQL servers that are gigantic. And when I say this HP Superdome, it's ridiculous.
I remember those.
Yeah. So then you have a level of comparison to an environment like that, where customers are already running on-prem, and they're like, well, gee, it's a little slower in the cloud, and but there's not.
Never heard that. I've never heard that in my entire life. Never heard that.
So that's like, how do you compete with that and get that customer interested and compelled to and paying all the advantages they have, and being able to maybe provide them compute capacity on demand, and eliminating some of the maintenance burdens they have. So you have kind of these you kind of compete with yourself a little bit for some of those sorts of things. But for all intents and purposes, we took our core product and binaries that support that product, and just kind of lifted and shifted into that largely infrastructure as a service world, and kind of going through some transformations to try to evolve that over for both our benefit as well as customer benefits, to kind of to make more effective use of cloud native capabilities.
So it's like more like a monolith at this time, and you're kind of looking at how you could kind of tease out some of the pieces, that making it more modular, more friendly for the cloud.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't share that yet. That's our future show. He's coming
Yeah.
back in August
Oh, sorry about
to
that.
talk about that.
Yeah.
I heard you mention it earlier too, Ryan, which I wanted to drill into a little bit. Like one of the things that in the on-premises world, like if you've got a Superdome instance that you're running your SQL Server on, you are running a Superdome 24/7, 365. Like that's
Yep.
what you have. Have y'all been able to, because typically this stuff requires minimal code changes to take advantage of scaling out, scaling up, some of the flexibility of the cloud? I mean, and that's hopefully
Yeah.
that's sort of how you're able to entice people to come in as well. But
Yeah. So with some of the flexibilities and being able to, put custom DLLs and that sort of thing, like we're trying to still accommodate, some levels of customization, be able to allow a customer to take better advantage of the cloud to be able to expand and contract, as opposed to, having lots of snowflake environments, that are painful to administer. And then we have, there's some backup operational things that have to kind of come along with that to be able to make it, to be able to address any sort of DR challenges. But if your environment is the same for every customer and you don't have any customizations, obviously that operationally makes you so much more efficient and allows you to do things like, when a customer is coming to the end of a quarter and they need to run a bunch of additional scenarios for consolidation, like we can provide them that horsepower without having to say, well, somebody's got to create another virtual machine for you to be able to do that. So that, and that's where some of the flexibility and benefits can be provided to a customer that might have, an amazingly powerful SQL server, but maybe, the surrounding stuff that their application runs on, they're never going to be able to achieve the scale that the cloud can provide to be able to allow them to bump up. Unless
that's right, because you've got the app servers that go with the SQL server, right? And those, those are, you're probably not going to have a Superdome for those.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Even though you might need it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering how you use security and authentication in Azure, right? Do you make use of Azure AD, or is that a custom? You're still using the on-premises custom authentication?
So it's funny, and I that when you think about it, something as simple as a username and password is like the most complex thing in the world to address, because every customer has different ways of dealing with it, and you have different identity providers, Ping, Okta, Azure AD. So we have to be supportive of any and all of those, SAML and all of these different identity providers. So we have a kind of a mix of things. So we obviously we support Azure AD, and we have AD tenants for our deployments that we use internally, and I kind of talk a little bit why that there's some significance there. But then we use Identity Server, which is an open source provider that's available for in .NET to be able to kind of accommodate, and then there's a lot of veneer kind of wrapped around that to be able to make it easy for customers to configure things. The idea being that they can jack that into a variety of different identity providers, and we have to be supportive of whatever that they or comes with. So and if you can imagine, like we have holding companies that actually have lots of other entities that they own, and they've decided purposefully to keep all those companies separate because they might spin them off or sell them. So and because of that, there's lots of additional challenges that come with identity, because now you've got maybe a CFO at the holding company, but then you've got all these finance people.
Totally different identities potentially.
Yeah, exactly. So there's lots of challenges that kind of come along with identity, which, like I said, is still funny to me to think about the fact that it's username and password, but it's really freaking complicated when it comes out.
So you have like federating scenarios and whatnot.
Yeah. And then, we ourselves have to maintain, again, kind of going back to the compliance side, our environments have to be controlled. So, like any other SaaS provider. So, when an operational person needs to make a change to that environment on behalf of a customer, it has to be associated with some sort of ticket the customer has created. And then, there's, privileged access given to that person only to that environment based on, with the ticket being the key to unlock it. And those are, all audited things. So it's really not any different than a lot of challenges SaaS providers have to abide by. But so that's more of an internal construct that we have to deal with to be able to allow us to operate a customer environment versus how our customers are authenticating into our environment. So.
And was that a big challenge to get customers to buy into the cloud model, knowing that they have to, because I'm sure those customers also have to adhere to their financial standards, right, in using this product. And so, previously, of course, they had it on premises, or they're like, okay, it's in our control now, it's running somewhere else. What's going to happen?
It's interesting you say that, because my prior role at Microsoft, I did have some experience in working with OneStream before I came here, and why that's relevant and worth mentioning is that the financial services space, I think, is kind of a laggard when it comes to technology because of some of the things you just mentioned. So, think about, movie studios or computational fluid dynamics, like these workloads that need lots of compute power, like those are really easy early adopters for them to kind of see, gee, this, the cloud makes absolute sense. But in the finance world, particularly, when you're dealing with, keys to the kingdom numbers for organizations, or, financial details, like there is a level of concern that kind of surrounds that type of data in terms of, who has access to it, what can be done with it, what controls are in place. So why that's all significant is that we had to prove to our customers, and I think other financial, SaaS providers like us also have to do this, to prove to your customers that you have levels of controls and compliance in place to be able to protect their data and make that not a concern. And it very much is a joint effort between us and the customer. We talked about identity providers, like, their identity providers have to be, have MFA and those sorts of things to be able to make sure that some bad actor doesn't have access, from another. They're typically logging in the U.S. and all of a sudden some rogue login appears from some other country in Europe or Asia, to trip that maybe they should be prompted for MFA to be able to block their access. Right. So it's a shared level of concern between how we operate the customer's environment and then what sort of things that they have in place to protect access to their data, because ultimately that's where their IDP comes in to be able to help be part of that equation.
The other thing that caught my attention when you were talking about the compliance requirements, right? And I think the financial industry, the medical industry, there are definitely some industries that are super tightly regulated.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've heard customers talk about in the past was trying to sort of change their compliance stance, how they manage it on premises, to how they're managing it in the cloud. Did you find that were you sort of breaking new ground with some of these, or were you able to leverage some of the compliance that Azure has to sort of use in a transitive fashion to pass through you? Like, how did that story end up working?
So that actually is also going back to my earlier comment about being glad that we didn't build out data centers.
Because then you would have had to do the compliance yourself.
I'm really thankful we didn't do that, because it would have been there's an element of the entire onus would fall on us to be able to, we still have SOC audits and stuff that we have to abide by. But when it comes to like physical access controls and, access to, data at the data center level and all of those operational constructs, we can ride on the rails of Azure. So that's hugely beneficial for us, for sure. Versus us having to invent that or to have to deal with that. And deal with it at scale, which is a whole nother animal. Just building a one-off data center might be relatively easy, but then doing that at massive scale with the capacity needed to address your customer environments is a whole nother ballpark or concern rather. And then we build on top of that. We have our own ISO compliance certifications. SOC audits, and then FedRAMP, FedRAMP-High. Like we have our own attestations that we have to abide by because we operate those environments. But to a large degree, there's many components of that are checkboxes because we're sitting on Azure. So
It was, it was kind of interesting to hear that you're using Azure DevOps as your kind of main deployment pipeline. I think you said you use Terraform for the infrastructure, and then the application engineering software gets deployed using pipelines. How does this work across so many deployments that you have, right? I'm just more like a question because I've never seen customers use it. I don't know what the capacity of Azure DevOps is to handle that many deployments, right? I mean, I'm sure there's, I don't want to put numbers, but I'm sure there's many hundreds of deployments that you have to do. Maybe more. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you, was there any challenges using Azure DevOps for that?
Yeah, so not necessarily challenges, but with the tool, but certainly when you think about infrastructure at just call it, you're close to that 2,000 customer mark, and then the environments, some of those environments are really big, and what that means is that you can't, when you're touching them, you can't just touch. It's not just one piece of infrastructure; it's a whole bunch that you have to touch to be able to do anything in that particular environment. And that's kind of where that cloud scales comment I made earlier, that is going to be hugely beneficial to kind of make that more efficient. But so certainly, what Azure DevOps can facilitate is the ability to run, PowerShell and Terraform across customer environments, to be able to do some of those automations. There's no way we'd survive if that wasn't automated. So just with the plethora of what that physical landscape looks like with the number of VMs that we have in our fleet, it would be an impossibility to manage without that. So but through we have some infrastructure we deploy into those single tenant environments that allow us to be able to invoke these management operations against that customer's environment in a controlled way, which that also means that there's infrastructure that we have to support to be able to make that possible, whereby in the cloud native world we can eliminate some of those elements that out of the equation, make it even more efficient for us to do things. But today it's a large amount of PowerShell, with some infrastructure to be able to support that, DevOps and.
So you must have like a number of agents or whatever, the Azure DevOps agents, because I can imagine if you have to do a software update across all of your environments, I mean that's a lot of deployments, right? Many hundreds of deployments that you're doing, and you don't want it to take like a week to do that because you want to make sure they're all up, in sync, right? Everyone's in sync with the correct version. So you want to have, so that's why that was the question about, like how do you do like so many deployments that have to be done quickly? Like, do you scale up your number of agents when you need them? Do you have like some sort of auto scaling there that you use? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there's some outage windows that our customers today, and this is talking in the world today, that for a couple purposes. One is to be able to take on a new version of OneStream, and there's some technical reasons behind that, because when you think about things like I mentioned SQL Azure database, like you have to upgrade that, you have to apply a new schema to that, and you can't do that necessarily while things are running against it. So so when it also seems this actually some interesting information that for a SaaS provider is really uncommon to have a version, and we have to, because of the space we are in. So if you think of going back to my comment about audited financials, so you have an auditor coming in saying, what did you use to calculate these numbers, and what is the, and it has to be proven that the underlying software that.
Well, that's right. The software can't change because it changed. Yeah, you're right.
So there has to be a correlation between what is actually what is produced to to the market, or your audited financials that you're maintaining if you're not publicly traded. Like the auditor comes in, they want to be able to reconcile that, and then also likewise when an upgrade happens, there's a partnership between us and the customer. They have to then do that in some test environment and validate that the bring an auditor back in and say, yeah, these numbers are the same from last quarter or the quarter before. So that actually introduces a whole nother challenge when it comes to upgrades, because we can't just roll it out across our fleet as much as we would like to. So there is a version number kind of bound to what we have deployed. We're trying to figure out some ways to be able to make that a little bit easier for us, and also provide that level of control. But
Yeah. So that I just wanted to say one thing on that point, Evan. This is really interesting because so this falls under the concept of a bitemporal database, right? Where you have to be able to make sure that your calculation is tied, you can go back in time and see things exactly as they were back in time. And the reason it's interesting because I wrote a paper, an IEEE paper on this topic just a couple of years ago on bitemporal database for this very problem. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, I just sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Now you got to include the link, Sajid. When we do the show notes, now you got to include the link. I'm dying to know the because I didn't even think about the versioning problem because I didn't have experience with that scenario before, although I've run into it now that you describe it. It does the cloud make the versioning problem easier, harder, or is that just sort of about the same? I'm just sort of curious. Like, does it enable it or?
So I think
I don't know.
So that's a good question. I think that there's a couple of answers to that. I think that one is it makes it easier for the environments that we control, because when there's customer environments, as you well know, especially and I've been working in the support world, when customers have their you're dealing, it's a wild west out there.
Please, would you upgrade one day? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So there's an element of consistency, I guess, maybe would be a good way to answer that. That when it's when it's under the auspices of our control, obviously there's gremlins that appear, but for all intents and purposes, it's mostly consistent, and with the exceptions that you have to kind of troubleshoot off on the side. But so certainly adds an element of ease because of all the automations that we've put in place that address a lot of the issues that have arisen over the years. And then and you think about that going forward, like there's what if there was a way to just kind of go into that herd mentality, like if you could just easily swap in vNext into that customer's environment very rapidly, in a couple of seconds, having those environments materialize, as opposed to kind of the more heavier handed virtual machine based approach. Like that there's some powerful constructs that the cloud affords us that can accelerate that going forward. The database side is still the interesting challenge, because that you've got customers with hundreds of gigs of data. How do the schema updates on that is a challenge, but that's actually where other database constructs like schema and read and NoSQL, non-relational stores become really powerful to be able to help facilitate that. But in the relational world, that's kind of a linchpin.
Still a thing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, no, this is great, Ryan. It's sort of interesting to me to hear you talk about this, because when we used to run into each other, there was always something was really broken and it was a different customer every time. And, you and I were sort of learning it on the fly. So it's sort of neat to hear that this different perspective. Any last, for the audience's benefit, we will have you back in a couple of months to talk about sort of where you're going to go architecturally. But any sort of last gotchas or guidance that you want to give the audience about, as they think about moving to the cloud, or things they should be thinking about there that you sort of learned after you moved over to OneStream, right? Because it's a different perspective.
Yeah, I would say automate as much as you can, and sometimes to the lift and shift is a way to get you to the cloud very rapidly, but sometimes it's
going to hurt sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you have a long tail of things to address afterwards, and I think that if you just take a step back and maybe think about, is there a different receptacle to put this application into? Is there a different way to host this application? Is there a different way to maybe just kind of eliminate the whole infrastructure element of this application and just kind of focus on whatever the workload is, and be able to materialize virtualize infrastructure when needed without having to to have something you have to patch and back up and maintain. Like if you can automate away some of those things, or maybe just totally eliminate and make them not a concern, then yeah, and sometimes the level of effort is just a little bit more to be able to do that. And I think that would be, something that is worth the investment of time.
I'm sensing a containers conversation in
Yeah.
a couple months in all likelihood.
Yeah, exactly. Containers, scale sets, and any
Yeah.
of those constructs,
Yeah.
yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, no, Ryan, it's it was great to run into you again a couple months back. It's great to have you on the show again. And appreciate you coming on.
All right.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, it's a great
Thanks.
discussion.
Bye, folks.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay.